I know what you are probably thinking. Hey buddy, I'm in this course to learn Node and write some JavaScript. Well, we are on the way in this. Our next major section will actually start to write some code in Node.js. This section is Node Core. For our first lecture, we'll have a conceptual aside. And in this aside, we'll talk for a moment about server and client. We have already said several times that Node.js is a server technology. It's designed to be able to use JavaScript to write server code. So what do we mean by that, by server and client? Well, at its most basic, a server is a computer that is performing services. It's just a computer and it's performing jobs that are requested of it. The client asks for those services, and the client may also do some work, but the server does the heavier, deeper amount of work. So the client makes a request for a service, for some work to be performed, and the server responds with perhaps verification that the work has been performed, or error messages, or data, or other things. And that request is in some standard format that both the client and server are programmed to understand, and so is the response also a standard format that both the client and server are programmed to understand. So both the client and server are computers. In fact, they may be the same computer in some circumstances, but the client is asking for the work to be done and the server is doing the work. This is called the client-server model of computing. Now, this standard model of request and response in a standard format between client and server exists in one of the most popular means of using this model, that is the internet. So we are used to talking about a web server. That is a computer connected to an internet that is accepting requests for work or data and is then providing response. The usual client is the internet browser like Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, Firefox or Safari. And they communicate with request and response for the work to be done for those services. And the standard format is HTTP. There is an HTTP request and HTTP response. Now we'll talk about a little bit in that course about these kind of things. But for now, we're going to focus on the programming language that we use when writing web software on the client and the server. If you have done any kind of front-end web development, meaning coding in the browser, we use HTML and CSS for laying out our information and our web page. But if you have done any coding, you have likely done it in JavaScript, because that is the language that the browser have standardized on. Browser like Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Internet Explorer, and Edge. They implement a JavaScript engine of some kind so that we can code in JavaScript. Now, Google Chrome, for example, is a C++ program. It embeds V8 and it makes extra feature available to JavaScript within the Google Chrome browser. For example, if you have done with JavaScript, maybe using the jQuery JavaScript library, editing DOM elements, that is the HTML elements after they have been pulled into memory, editing the content of the web page dynamically, or perhaps using Ajax and the XML HTTP request object. If you have done any of those kind of things, you have done something that's outside the ECMAScript specification. If you look for DOM manipulation, you won't find it in the ECMAScript standard. That's nothing about editing a web page, but those features are made available to JavaScript. Those features made available, in this case, that we are talking about the Google Chrome C++ program, that is the browser. So this idea of giving JavaScript more features already exists. If you have done any JavaScript coding in a browser, you're already using this idea of features that don't by default exist in the JavaScript, but that are made available through JavaScript for you to do work. Now that said, the work that you are doing is client work and requesting services, requesting data from the web server. Many times in the real world environment, in real companies, you might have to do more than just one side of this coding work, not just the browser, not just the web server, but both. So you may have been using PHP or C# if you were using ASP.NET, or Ruby if you're using Ruby on Rails, or other programming languages that are used within particular web server technologies. So you had to switch back and forth between two different programming languages at least in order to get your work done. But the goal here with Node.js is instead to write JavaScript on the web server. So the web server still needs to do all these jobs and work, and just like the browser, we're going to use JavaScript. So you only need one programming language in your tool belt while you're building your software, and just like the browser, we can add on features to JavaScript to make available features to JavaScript that are useful for the work that needs to be done. For the browser, things like manipulating the DOM, manipulating the elements that appear on the web page, for example. On the web server, there is other thing that need doing. Now, this isn't the only reason why Node.js exists, to write server code in JavaScript, but it is a really great benefit that you can actually share libraries of code between the browser and the web server, and that you and any others that work on whatever project you are working on only need to worry about one programming language that entire time that you are writing code. Alright, so this is clients and servers. Let's talk more specifically about Node.js.